Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Take Your Shot podcast. Of course, as always, I'm your wonderful host, Joshua Gitman. And it was an interesting weekend this weekend. It wasn't a bad weekend, but it was a long weekend, which is why I had to cancel this episode on Monday. But we're here on this beautiful Wednesday afternoon, and we will be here every other Monday, as long as Fridays and still Wednesdays for the rest of the NBA playoffs. And we'll be covering the NBA playoffs here for you with the latest predictions, recaps, previews, and hottest takes and debates right here on the Take Your Shot podcast. So very excited for the rest of the postseason. And these series have gotten very interesting in the time that I was gone. Of course, that wonderful Knicks and Pacers series, one of my personal favorites of this year's playoffs. So one of my favorites in a quite a while, I would say, as a playoff series. It's the Garden's rocking. You've got this young Indiana team rising. You've got the storyline of the Knicks not being healthy. It's storyline after storyline, back and forth after back and forth. And of course, the Knicks got the job done in game five, taking a 3-2 lead and have the opportunity to close out in Indiana, but that will be tough, and we will see what happens there. Of course, we have Denver storming back after everyone thought Minnesota was on the verge of sweeping the Denver Nuggets to now potentially closing the series out in 6 games, going back to the conference finals once again. We have the Thunder after people thought the Mavericks were going to take control of this series, tie the series up at 2-2, going back to Oklahoma City. And then we have Boston with a little bit of a scare in Cleveland in game four without Donovan Mitchell, but still ended up getting the job done and winning a game in the clutch, which is something we thought we couldn't do. They couldn't do. And then also this weekend, we will start with what we had on Sunday, which is the draft lottery, and something that has been improbable, something that we haven't seen since 2011 when Derrick Rose went to the Chicago Bulls, and the Chicago Bulls had a 1.7% chance, if I'm not mistaken, to win that particular draft lottery. The Atlanta Hawks in this scenario had the 10th worst record, were in the play-in tournament, had a 3% chance to get the number one pick, and ended up getting their first number one pick since 1975. So this Sunday was an historic day for Atlanta. They got the number one pick, and now it's a little bit of an intriguing offseason for them and what they are going to potentially do here. Of course, you've got the dynamic in Atlanta. You've got the 2 point guards, Trae Young, DeJounte Murray. To me, it was pretty clear, and to the rest of the league, it's pretty clear that they don't like to play with each other. So what now? Do you trade one of them? Who knows? But now this number one pick makes it a little bit more interesting. And the number one pick, it could be anyone because this, to considering most NBA scouts have said this is probably the weakest draft class since the 2013 draft class. And most people remember who was the number one pick in that 2013 draft class, and it being Anthony Bennett. So don't have your hopes too high here. But you never know who that number one pick could be, and Atlanta does control the board here. And if I had to make the prediction, I would say it's going to be Alex Sarr, the center, and that would make it a little bit more inclining to trade Clint Capella and Neko Okongwu in a deal centered around Trae Young or DeJounte Murray. I don't know which one's going to be traded for Atlanta, but I think definitely with this number one pick now, it makes the decision more firm, in my opinion, to that trade Trae Young or trade DeJounte Murray unless you want to trade the number one pick. But I think this number one pick is going to have the least value it has had in a long time because, as I said, most NBA GMs don't think this draft is too valuable. And I heard reports from anonymous executives saying that having the number one pick this year is like having the number eight pick, number seven pick in normal years, which is a big gap, a big drop from a normal draft, and clearly something that is definitely being looked upon with the executives in the league. So if you were Atlanta, I wouldn't take the approach of trading the number one pick here. I would keep the number one pick, draft Alex Czar, in my opinion. You could also draft the French guy. I'm what's his name? I can't even remember the name because the draft is just that week. The draft hasn't really been talked about that much. Oh, Zach Richard, whatever his name is. And then you could also draft UConn center Donovan Clingan as well with that number one pick. But I expect Atlanta to go big here. You clearly don't need any guards, but there's not that many great forwards that you can take with the number one pick. And I'm assuming if you're going to keep at least one of DeJounte Murray and Trae Young, you're not going to draft a guard, and you're going to probably draft one of the big guy. And I'm assuming, as I mentioned, Okongwu is going to be in one of the trades with DeJounte and Trae Young. And what I would do if you're Atlanta, I would trade Trae Young. I think Trae Young is the guy that needs to go for this Atlanta Hawks basketball team. When you looked at Atlanta this season without Trae Young, they were better on the defensive side. They were more efficient there. They actually were over 500, if I'm not mistaken, two to 4 games over 500. I don't know the exact record on the top of my head, but Atlanta was much better. We saw it at the end of the season when they won 2 games against the Boston Celtics. So we saw flashes of how good this Atlanta team can be. And we know this Atlanta team with the right pieces around them can go far. We've seen this similar build with this Atlanta team for now a couple of years, and they made the conference finals with it in 2021 in what was a relatively weak Eastern Conference. And it still is a particularly relatively weak Eastern Conference. So there's potential here if Atlanta does improve, does maybe trade the number 1 pick to get better, you could have the potential of getting a third superstar around Trae and DeJounte to make another conference finals run. But I think the best approach for Atlanta, trade Trae Young, maybe throw in a Kongwu to get more value back and build around that number 1 pick. Find a way to build around him with DeJounte Murray and see where it goes from there, because I think the Hawks were a decent team with DeJounte Murray at the helm. And I'm going to bring up this trade for Atlanta because I really like it. I heard it on the Bill Simmons podcast. I think his podcast is amazing. You guys should go watch that. The trade was, if I'm not mistaken, it was Trae Young and the number 1 pick to Brooklyn. Brooklyn gives Cam Johnson, Julius Randle to the Hawks, and Mikal Bridges goes to the Knicks. Now, if you're the Knicks, you absolutely love that trade because now you get Mikal Bridges to pair along with what is DiVincenzo, Brunson, and Josh Hart, now the Nova 4, not the Nova 3. And then if you're Brooklyn, you get Trae Young potentially, and you also get, excuse me, Trae Young wasn't on that trade. It was Bogdanovich. It was it was Bogdanovich. Big difference from Trae Young to Bogdanovich there. Trae Young stays with the team. You get Bogdanovich and the number 1 pick. And then you get Julius Randle. That is a trade that I like. But I think if I like that trade from Bill Simmons, but I think you could edit that trade, giving up instead of the number 1 pick, Trae Young to the Atlanta Hawks, maybe getting back like Cameron Johnson and Julius Randle from the Knicks, Cam Johnson from the Nets. Bridges goes to New York, and I think that trade would work out pretty splendid for Atlanta. And if you had a lineup of DeJounte Murray, whoever the shooting guard is, maybe it's Bogdanovich, Cam Johnson, Julius Randle, and the number 1 pick, your team is looking a lot better and a lot more promising for the future. So I think if Atlanta could move on from Trae Young and get somebody like a Julius Randle, kind of a caliber player, not necessarily rebuilding with that number 1 pick, giving up everything, but maybe reloading, getting someone to help this Atlanta team. And you could see the same thing with San Antonio. You could trade Trae Young to San Antonio. You could get Keldon Johnson. You can get Malachi Branham. You can get guys like that to help your team immediately. Plus, get your picks back as well and build around the number 1 pick. So now you control your own destiny and you can build around the number 1 pick along with assets as well. So I think the best move for Atlanta here is to trade Trae Young, keep that number 1 pick, and build around it. Other lottery takeaways that I saw during the lottery was the Pistons once again dropped to the 5th pick for the 3rd year straight. I mean, if you're Detroit, this is probably miserable to watch. I think the draft lottery might be just as bad as your 28-game losing streak this season. It was a disaster to watch Pistons fans. 14 wins, and you drop to the worst possible spot you can go in this draft lottery. And you got to feel for Pistons fans a little. I know that team has been miserable and they've done nothing to help themselves ever since they even traded for Blake Griffin. But the fact that this Pistons team has once again fallen in the draft lottery is hilarious because 2023, you had Wemby. 2022, number 1 pick, you had Paolo Banchero. There's many opportunities for Detroit to get a significantly better player than they got. No offense to Sarr Thompson and Jaden Ivey, but Paolo Banchero and Victor Wembanyama are on different levels. And you can just see with this new draft lottery format now that if you're the worst team, you are definitely not guaranteed to get the number 1 pick. And the last 5 years, teams with the worst record in the league did not get the number one pick. So this draft lottery is changing and you cannot tank anymore. That is what is happening here in the NBA. Also, the Spurs got two draft lottery picks. They got their own, which jumped up to the fourth pick. And what was a disaster ended up being a disaster for the Toronto Raptors. They're they had a pick from the Jakob Poeltl trade. The Spurs, they traded Poeltl to the Raptors. The Raptors, for some reason, gave them that first round pick of this year, top six protected. Most people thought that pick was going to be top six unless it dramatically dropped two spots. And it did. It dropped actually three spots, if I'm not mistaken. And the Raptors lost that pick and gave it to San Antonio for basically Jakob Poeltl. And Jakob Poeltl is not this amazing center that you give up a first round pick for this year. You got 29 wins. You were literally trying to take one of your players, literally gambled because they knew that your team was tanking. And yet here you are losing your first round pick because of Jakob Poeltl. Welcome to franchise misery and franchises death decisions. This is the NBA today, folks. And so the Spurs now get this opportunity where it's a little interesting because now you've got these two lottery picks, but you've got Wembanyama, a guy who's going to be a generational star, a future star in this league, probably an all-star next season. Do you want to trade some of those lottery picks, trade some of the young guys to get better? Because now you have two lottery picks. You could trade one of them and take somebody and you could trade another one to get players to help Wembanyama win now. Because if I'm Wembanyama, I'm the Spurs. My expectations are at least to make the play next year, and then the following year, the playoffs. If you are the Spurs, you are going to want to win now. You are going to want to make Victor Wembanyama happy here. So it'll be interesting to see what the Spurs do with those two picks, considering how weak this draft class is. The weak draft class dynamic makes it a little bit interesting to potentially trade these picks and think differently about the way the offseason goes, potentially on how your draft lottery luck goes. So that's the interesting dynamic of the draft lottery. And it applies in Atlanta because Atlanta now has the decision to make. Do you want to go all in with Trey and DeJounte, or do you want to trade Trey and build around that number one pick? And now it's San Antonio. Do you want to trade some of those picks to help Wembanyama, or do you want to continue this rebuilding process and draft some young guys? So there's decisions that are going to have to be made in this draft lottery based solely off the weak draft class, then that's going to be something that we are going to watch this offseason unfold before and during the NBA draft. Now let's move on to our playoff series. As first, we'll talk about the Knicks and the Pacers. The New York Knicks got a huge win against the Indiana Pacers in a game 5, which looked to New York to be a must win to in order to keep their season alive and not go to Indiana down 2. Now they are up 3-2 after they won 121 to 91. In this game, Jalen Brunson was absolutely sensational. 44 points for the man. You don't call him a superstar, think again, because this man is an absolute bucket getter. He's an absolute superstar, and he is changing the New York Knicks franchise. Now, for the game 3 in this series, we thought that Indiana was going to blow New York out. They didn't. They kept it close, and it took an Andrew Nemhart miracle shot in order for the New York Knicks to lose that game and go down 2-1. I didn't end up saying this because there was no podcast Monday, but in my opinion personally, I thought that the New York Knicks should have held out Jalen Brunson for game 3 in order to prepare for game 4, have more rest time for game 4 to go up 3-1. Because if you are up 2-0 and you basically have this feeling that even with Brunson on the court, you're probably going to lose game 3, because you got to give credit to Indiana. It looks like it's a hard challenge. It's a hard, difficult challenge to beat that Indiana Pacers team 3 times in a row. So if you're New York, why not sit Jalen Brunson out? Why didn't you sit Jalen Brunson out? Now you see what happened in game 4, where New York all of a sudden is just tired. They're out of it. They basically gave up after the first quarter. And now here we are 2-2. So New York could have made better decision making there. Ultimately, Brunson was hurt, and it's okay to sit him down for one game in the second round. We've seen star players sit out in second round playoff games before. It's not the end of the world if you're Tom Thibodeau. And that ultimately caused the Indiana Pacers to get the momentum, tie the series. But New York in this game 5 took it right out of them. It was, in my opinion, fully on Jalen Brunson's performance. There was really nothing else that elevated this Knicks team to where they were in this game, made this game a 30-point game. And part of that, you give credit where credit is due to Jalen Brunson. but part of that is because of the Indiana Pacers' defensive practices. Now, the Indiana Pacers had three primary defenders on Jalen Brunson. You had Aaron Nesmith, of course, you had TJ McConnell, and you had Andrew Nemhard for most of this game five and for most of the series, to be quite honest. Well, Rick Carlisle most of the time puts Andrew Nemhard on Jalen Brunson. And in this game, he put him on him a lot. And throughout the series, Andrew Nemhard, great offensive player, but he's not really this defensive player who's going to be a game changer on that side of the ball. He sometimes can be the offensive guy who can be a game changer, but on the defensive side of the ball, he's not going to make that big difference. So if you're Rick Carlisle, why are you not putting Aaron Nesmith or TJ McConnell in the game? And especially Aaron Nesmith now that OG Anunoby is out. I understand if OG Anunoby is in the game, you put Aaron Nesmith on him because he's that offensive threat on the wing and you need him for a forward to match with the height and the physicality. I understand that part, but right now OG Anunoby is out and Jalen Brunson is clearly the only person on the Knicks, other than the exception of maybe DiVincenzo in some instances, like game three, he looked like he could not miss. Jalen Brunson is the guy that's going to be the bucket getter for this Knicks team. Jalen Brunson is that guy. So why are you leaving Aaron Nesmith in the corner while Andrew Nemhard is getting absolutely smoked and absolutely cooked by Jalen Brunson every single possession going down court? He drew fouls. He got open space. He created that separation. He got downhill easy. He opened up other teammates easy because he was beating the defender, and help defenders were going to have to help every single time Andrew Nemhard was guarding Jalen Brunson in this game. Why not put Aaron Nesmith in there? Someone who has held Jalen Brunson to 30% three-point shooting. And why didn't you put TJ McConnell in there if you're Rick Carlisle? When you think about it, TJ McConnell in the games, game three, down the stretch, even in the losses, game two, game one, TJ McConnell has played great defense against Jalen Brunson this whole series. He's been physical. He's that kind of a guy off the bench who can afford fouls, can be aggressive on Jalen Brunson. That dog mentality up in his face, picking him up 94 feet. That is who TJ McConnell is. And Rick Carlisle doesn't use TJ McConnell enough. I've been thinking about this the past couple of days. He has not been playing that much. He's only playing like 10 minutes a game. And I understand you have Tyrese Halliburton and he's your point guard. He's your star point guard, of course. But why not play them together? We've seen them play together this season. Why can't Tyrese Halliburton play with TJ McConnell? Why can't TJ McConnell be a ball handler and Tyrese Halliburton set him up? If you're that, you shouldn't be that worried on the offensive side of the ball. If you're Rick Carlisle, you know how good your team is and you know how capable your team is of performing on the offensive side of the ball, no matter who the five is on the court. Worry about the defensive end where you're not being able to stop Jalen Brunson. And now this is the third time, if I'm not mistaken, in the series where Jalen Brunson has had over 35 points in this series, and something's got to change, and you're going to have to play TJ McConnell more. Rick Carlisle said it in game one that he needed to play TJ McConnell down the stretch more. Where has TJ McConnell been? TJ McConnell has not played down the stretch for this Pacers team. He has just not been there. So what now, Rick? Did you just lie to us? Did you just say in the face that you were going to do something and you didn't? Because that's what I've been seeing. Rick Carlisle needs to make that adjustment for game six. I still think Indiana's going to win game six in this series. Don't get me wrong. But in a game seven situation where New York is in the Garden, Indiana has proven not to win in the Garden so far. Why do I think that they're going to win in the Garden again? They got smacked. They got smacked in the face. Why in a game seven where I trust New York superstar more than Indiana's superstar of Halliburton or Siakam? Why do I think Indiana can win in the Garden? I can't. And Rick Carlisle hasn't shown me he's made the adjustments because I think this Indiana personnel, this Indiana roster, especially considering the Knicks' health, has the capability of beating this New York Knicks team in a 7-game series. And hey, I think they have the capability of beating the Knicks in the next 2 games and potentially stealing and shocking this series from the New York Knicks. Could they do it? Yes, but Rick Carlisle needs to make the adjustments. I don't think it's a player's thing. I think Tyrese Halliburton had a bad game one. That was a player's thing, but other than that, he stepped up to the plate. He's been amazing this series. Siakam has played solid this season, this series. Everybody for Indiana has played solid. There hasn't been really any liabilities on the offensive side of the ball. It's been the defensive side of the ball, and the defensive side of the ball is more coaching rather than your schemes and coverages is more coaching. Offense is execution. Defense is more coaching, putting the correct matchups on the correct players. That is what defense is. That is what sets up teams to have defensive success. And Andrew Nemhart cannot be guarding Jalen Brunson anymore in order for the Pacers to win the series. I expect that adjustment to be made. I don't know the status of OG Anunoby. People say he's going to probably be out for a little bit of time, but you've got a 4-day rest period now. I think actually a 3-day rest period, 4-day in total, but 3 days you're not playing until game 6, which is going to be on Friday. So you have time for OG Anunoby to get back healthy. And this game 5 was the opportunity for the Pacers to steal this series and go back home up 3-2 and win the series. And they couldn't do it. They got smoked. Clearly, some players need to play better, but I don't think the offense has been a problem here. It's been the defense, and Indiana's giving New York whatever they want, and they're going to have to make that adjustment because in the games where Brunson hasn't played well, the Pacers have won. The Pacers have won. And those 2 games have been on the road. But still, the defense of McConnell, the defense of Aaron Nesmith, when OG Anunoby has been out, Nesmith can go on to Brunson now. Those 2 have been amazing on the defensive side of the ball. And quite frankly, those are your only 2 reliable assets on the defensive side of the ball. Those are the only 2 you trust if you're Rick Carlisle, you're the Pacers playing on the defensive side of the ball. And if you're going to have to pick 2 players to guard that superstar in Jalen Brunson, it's got to be those 2. And Indiana's going to have to make that adjustment. Do I still think they can win this series? Absolutely. If they make the adjustments. Do I think they ultimately will? No, I think they will force a game 7, and it could be interesting. But the way I've seen Jalen Brunson play, the way I've seen New York make adjustments this series, the way I've seen New York get DiVincenzo going, get Burks going off the bench, I think New York, with the rest period going into game 6, will ultimately have enough to end the series, whether it is in 6 or in 7. I think it'll go to 7 now because Indiana's hard to beat on their home court, but I still think New York will win the series, and I think this series is about donezo for the Indiana Pacers. But let's move on to the Denver Nuggets and the Minnesota Timberwolves here, as the Denver Nuggets now defeat the Minnesota Timberwolves at home in what was a blowout fashion, 112-97, 15-point win here for the Denver Nuggets. And once again, the Denver Nuggets have won against Minnesota, and now they have taken a 3-2 lead. And I'm going to come on here on this podcast and tell you my prediction that I made in the last podcast because it's been that long. It's been that long. I said Minnesota had the opportunity to win the NBA championship. I said Minnesota had the opportunity to close out Denver pretty quickly. I didn't say a sweep like some people on national media. I didn't say a sweep, but I said 6-5. Well, Denver just proved the world wrong. Denver has come back strong. Denver has taken control of the series, and now they have the opportunity in what I think is most likely going to be the closeout game in the series to end Minnesota. Remember how I said Minnesota broke Denver down these last 3 games? Denver has broken Minnesota down, and it looks like Minnesota, after winning those first 2 games, losing these 3 straight, look out of it, look done, look tired, and they look ready to go home. In this game, Nikola Jokic, just incredible, showing why he deserved to be the MVP, scoring 40 points, 13 assists, 7 rebounds here. Very efficient game for Jokic. He was the superstar carrying this Denver team all the way here in this particular game. And what I took away from Jokic dominating was Rudy Gobert. Rudy Gobert in this situation. You're the defensive player of the year, right? You got to give credit. 4-time defensive player of the year, back to back, in a couple of years in Utah, has been pretty consistent on the defensive side of the ball in the regular season. But every time we get to the postseason, there's always been the question of where's Rudy Gobert? Where's Rudy Gobert? Rudy Gobert is shown he has been a liability on the defensive side of the ball in the playoffs, not the defensive player of the year that we know him to be in the regular season. Rudy Gobert is absolutely getting smacked. He's getting smoked by Nikola Jokic. He's getting smoked by the MVP. Of course, Jokic is the MVP, but you're the defensive player of the year. You're the guy that is tasked to guard Nikola Jokic. You are the guy that is responsible for at least containing him, which he did in the first 2 games, but all of a sudden he disappeared. Not consistent, just disappeared, been nowhere after the first 2 games. And I don't know why, But this has been a consistent problem for Rudy Gobert in the past in the postseason. We saw it with Utah, part of the reason why they've had their early losses and early disappointments, and potentially some second round losses and second round disappointments like this one Minnesota is about to have. Rudy Gobert has just not been playing good on the defensive side of the ball, and it's absolutely been killing the Minnesota Timberwolves in this situation. And if Minnesota wants any chance, they're going to have to play better defense on Denver in game 6. They're going to have to play better defense on Nikola Jokic, because Nikola Jokic is the center of this Denver offense. We've been saying this time after time. Everything goes through Jokic. I know Murray's the point guard. Everything goes through Jokic, and the key is to stop Jokic. And if you cannot trust a guy who was a defensive player of the year for you to guard that guy, and now he's turning into a liability, oh boy, that's the only thing I got to say. Oh boy, you guys are in trouble. You guys are in trouble going down the stretch. And for Denver, the adjustments they've made in this series to get Jokic open, to get Jokic more space on isolation with Rudy Gobert, has been spectacular. You got to give credit to Michael Malone there. He's opened up the floor a little bit. He's put more guys in the wings rather than being stagnant. He's had the opportunity. He's moved Gordon a little bit out of the dunker spot to force less big man in the paint, less big man to help Jokic. Karl-Anthony Towns not getting out of the paint. Shaden McDaniels now getting out of the paint. Now you're giving Jokic his space to work and attack on the post. And it's a great adjustment by Michael Malone. And it's great trust in Aaron Gordon. The fact that he trusts Aaron Gordon to not necessarily rely on the dunker spot and hit some three-pointers, that has been huge this series. And that adjustment with Gordon now actually being a reliable player on the three-point line has been huge, because now, as I mentioned, you've got to pull the big man out now from the paint. You give Jokic his work. Gordon's hitting the threes now. Gordon's being efficient, while Jokic is also being efficient as well. If Gordon can hit three-pointers for this Denver Nuggets team, watch out, because this opens up Denver's offense to a whole nother level. It gives Jokic not only the opportunity to score in the post, but distribute as well. And this has been the best I think Denver has played all season long, and they're doing it at the right time. Continuing on with Minnesota, you've got Anthony Edwards, who's played okay. He played okay in this game. He didn't play great, but he definitely needs to play better for Minnesota if they want to win the series. We have dubbed you as, quote unquote, the next Michael Jordan. I'm not saying that to put that much pressure on you, but Anthony Edwards, you've said it yourself. You're a superstar. You're a top 5 guy in this league right now, the way you've been playing. We expect you to be like that. You got your little celebration. Okay, he's a superstar. He's amazing. But now at the end of the day, your team just lost 3 straight. What are you going to do to respond? What are you going to do to respond to what Denver has done in this series? You are going to have to take over. You are going to have to find ways to score on the tough defense of KCP, on Michael Porter Jr. You're going to have to do that, because you've been the only source of offense for this Timberwolves team. I know Karl-Anthony Towns is there as well, but Karl-Anthony Towns has been inconsistent at times, and he hasn't been healthy, quite frankly. Remember, he had that injury to end the season. He didn't come back until the start of the postseason, and that injury has been lingering a little bit for Karl-Anthony Towns. He hasn't looked 100% healthy on the court for the Timberwolves. So now when you're looking at it, Anthony Edwards is really the only guy that Minnesota can rely on. I know they've had some other great sparks from other players in this series, such as Nickeil Alexander-Walker, such as Mike Conley, who I'll get into in a second here. But Anthony Edwards has been really the only guy that has been consistent every single game this series that can rely and get you a bucket. And if you're Minnesota, you're going to have to get it. You're going to have to hang in with this Denver team, especially the way Jokic has been playing now, the way Denver has adjusted now to open up the offense even more than it already was. Now you're going to have to hang in on the offensive side of the ball, because your defense now has been exposed. Not necessarily exposed in a way that, oh, it's completely garbage now, but your defense has been basically tampered upon to the point where, oh, you're not this unstoppable force anymore. Now we can get buckets on you. So you're going to have to get buckets on us. And Anthony Edwards is going to have to do that. As I mentioned, Mike Conley, he was not in this game. That's the one leeway I'll give for Minnesota. He was not in this game. Mike Conley opens up the offense a lot for this Timberwolves team. He handles the ball. He gives the rock to Anthony Edwards. He sets up players. He's great in the pick and roll with Rudy Gobert and Karl-Anthony Towns, the pick and pop with Karl-Anthony Towns. He's great with that, and he's been the guy, a leader for them, someone who can hold players accountable, someone who communicates on both sides of the ball. He is a very impactful player for Minnesota. So don't throw that him being out a little bit to the side. He has been great for Minnesota, and you could make the case he's been the second most impactful player for Minnesota in this postseason. You could make that case even ahead of guys on the defensive side of the ball like Jaden McDaniels, even a guy like Towns or Gobert as well. Mike Conley has been that impactful for Minnesota. So don't take that too seriously. Now, the outlook for the rest of the series. Minnesota's got to go into game 6 and they've got to make a statement. And it's got to be through Anthony Edwards, as I mentioned. And they're going to need that crowd because if I think there was another game in Denver right now, the series would be over. Now, do I think Minnesota is going to go into Denver and win a game 7? No. I think this series is over. I think Denver is going to end it in 6. The way Denver has been playing, they've exposed Minnesota's defense. They've played great all around, and they look like a team that is ready for their next opponent, ready to make that run back again to the NBA Finals. But Minnesota is going to have opportunities, and these last 3 games, they've broken down. They haven't executed those opportunities. So can we trust Minnesota right now in the situation from what we've seen the last week? Who knows? But it is a series. It can go back and forth because it is that kind of a playoff series. And who knows? Maybe Minnesota can do the unthinkable. And after losing 3 games, win 2 straight, 1 at home, 1 on the road to go back and steal the series from Denver. I don't think it's going to happen. Expect the unexpected, though. But I expect Denver to take control of this series. And also, quick thing before we move on to the next one. Jamal Murray has been playing great for Denver. Jamal Murray has been the guy who has impacted these past couple of games. Remember, Jamal Murray had absolutely terrible games, one in games 2. He was just not efficient, not great. And Jamal Murray has been the guy in the playoff runs. Remember, in 2020, they made the conference finals. 2023, they made the finals and won the finals. Those playoff runs have been solely based off the performance of Jamal Murray because those have been his 2 best playoff series. And actually, quite frankly, his only 2 playoff series because of the Achilles injuries, 21, 22. He hasn't been that bad we've seen in game 1 and game 2, and we're wondering how he would respond to his poor performances in those first 2 home games, and he has responded. We saw that half-court shot. When I saw that half-court shot and I saw that stare down by Kevin Harlan, I'm like, oh, he is back. He is back, and he is ready. So Jamal Murray has played great for this team, and Denver is on the driver's seat once again, and Minnesota, what a letdown. What a letdown for them. Disappointing, but they're still a young rising team. They still got an opportunity this series, so who knows, but I think Denver will close it out. Now let me move on to our other Western Conference series where the Oklahoma City Thunder have went into Dallas and tied the series. After Dallas won 2 straight, it looked like Dallas was getting the momentum in this series. They still won in Oklahoma City Thunder. They won by 9. Then they blew out the Thunder at home in game 3, and it's like, up, here come the Mavericks beating this young team, beating down this young team that we expect them to be down upon and going to be back in the conference finals. But the Thunder said, not so fast. Shout out to Lee Corso there. You've got this Thunder team now winning 100-96 in Dallas, and what was a game of adversity for the Thunder. The Thunder were down double digits in this game, and the Thunder looked like at points that they were going to break down. Dallas looked like at points that they were going to blow the gates open in this game and win this game, but the Thunder would not go away. The Thunder were staying close behind. The Thunder were not letting this get too out of control, and they were giving themselves chances to potentially make a run and to come back in this game. And that is the adversity of a championship team. That is what we've seen from a team like Denver this series. They didn't let the Lakers blow the gates open on them in the first round, and they had the opportunity to make a run to come back. And this is what the Thunder did. This is what a great team can do. Not let games get away from them. Even if they're playing a bad game, they don't let it get out of hand, and they have the opportunity to come back. And the Thunder executed that to perfection. As they did come back, they had a great 3rd quarter, and they had a great 4th quarter, a great overall second half, outscoring Dallas by 15 in the second half to come back and win this game down the stretch. And you've got to give Shai Gilgeous-Alexander his props once again. 34 points in 42 minutes of action. 14 of 27, pretty efficient from the field there. And he has single-handedly been carrying this Thunder team down the stretch. And could he have won MVP? Maybe. Controversial, absolutely. But at the end of the day, what he's doing right now to carry this young Thunder team to where they are, to being 2 wins away from a conference final, something that we could have never put our minds to. You've got to give a lot of credit where credit is due. And Shea has controlled the tempo for this game. He's been breaking down his matchups on the defensive side of the ball. And for this Thunder team, he's just been efficient, just efficient. That's all. He's just been efficient, and he's just been there. There's nothing really else to say about him. He's been an efficient player, someone who can be heavily relied upon, and someone who is going to take you to that next level. And he has officially hit superstardom. He is not only showed it now in the regular season, he showed it in the playoffs where he can face adversity. He can face tough times on the road, being down double digits on the road, and coming back in what was a must-win game for the Thunder. Because remember, they lose this game, they're now going back to Oklahoma City down 3-1 on the verge of elimination here. Now they win this game. They take home court back. They now have the advantage now, have 2 games at home left in now a 3-game series. And it looks like, oh, the Thunder now are back in this, have a decent shot now to win this series. And that was behind the realms of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and he did it all over the court. Also, you've got to give credit to a guy like Lu Dort. Lu Dort has been playing great defense on guys like Luka Doncic, on guys like Kyrie Irving. He has given problems to Luka Doncic in this postseason. Some games Luka played great, like Game 2, great bounce back for Luka. Game 3, he was also great. But in the games where the Thunder have won, he has relatively contained Luka Doncic. Okay, maybe Luka's been injured a little bit, but still, it's Luka. You know what, Doncic? Luka Doncic is a top 3 player, in my opinion, in our league at this present day. And the fact that Lu Dort is sometimes not only containing him, but full out and full blown stopping him on the defensive side of the ball consistently shows how much of an impact Lu Dort has had on this Thunder squad. And the fact that Lu Dort is just this role player on the side, not really talked about, is unacceptable. Lu Dort should be talked about more surrounding the success of this Thunder team. Lu Dort has been the guy that has actually been with this Thunder organization for the longest time. He may be tied with Shea, but Lu Dort has been with this team since he was with Chris Paul. I think he might have even had 1 year with Russell Westbrook. But Lu Dort has been this glue guy, been not necessarily this older guy, but he has been the veteran. He has been the leader for this team, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And he has shown it with his defense against a guy who was top 3, a guy who was an MVP finalist. You've got to give Lu Dort a lot of credit where credit is due here. And he has been a major reason why the Thunder have won, because it's not been their offensive efforts. It's been their defensive efforts. Notice how Doncic had 96 points. I mean, not Doncic. The Mavericks had 96 points. That is because of guys like Luka Doncic, guys like Kyrie Irving not going off, and that is behind the efforts of Lu Dort on the perimeter. This is supposed to be an offensive series. We've got Mavericks, a great offensive team. We got Thunder, a great offensive team. You got to give credit to the Mavericks as well. They're playing great defense. But this was supposed to be what was an incredible offensive series. But yet here we are in this defensive tight juggernaut battle, grit and grind series, and it's all on the efforts of defense with guys like Lu Dort. So give Lu Dort credit there. Now for the Mavericks. You had an opportunity to win this game. You had an opportunity to potentially close out the series in Game 5, and if not Game 5, Game 6. And now look at where you are. Now you're down 2-2. Now you're not down 2-2, tied 2-2. You lost home court advantage, and here you are. And it's, even though I just praised Lu Dort for his great defense, Luka Doncic, dude, come on. You've got to step up. Luka Doncic is the guy we're supposed to rely on in the playoffs. I don't care if he's injured. You're playing. Everybody's injured in the playoffs. That's just how it is. Look at the season. You've got guys injured all over the court, guys trying to come back. This is the NBA. You're going to be injured. You've got to play through it. And he's been playing through it. But you've got to perform while playing through it. That's what makes some of the good guys great. That's what makes some of the all-stars, the superstars, Hall of Famers. That's what separates those kind of guys. And that's not what we've seen from Luka consistently in the playoffs. Luka had the great Game 3 and the great Game 2. He had those great games, which is why the Mavericks has won. And when he's had games over 25, 2-0, under 25, 0-2. Coincidence? I think not. When you look at it, 18 points, unacceptable. 6 of 20 shooting, unacceptable. You cannot have that. I don't care Who's guarding you? I don't care if it's Dort. I don't care if you've got 10 guys on you. You've got to find ways to score. It's just that simple. It's just that plain and simple. And you've got to play better going down the stretch. Do I think the Mavericks are still going to win the series? Yes, I picked Dallas in 7 for a reason because I think this series is that competitive that it's going to be a 7-game series. But at the end of the day, Doncic is going to have to perform better. I don't care if he's injured. Okay, some of the blame could be put on Kyrie Irving, but Kyrie Irving for most of this playoffs has been carrying this Mavericks team on the offensive side of the ball, especially in the first round against the LA Clippers. It was Kyrie Irving. Kyrie Irving was the guy who you could rely heavily upon on the offensive end. That was Kyrie Irving. And in this series, it's been PJ Washington. PJ Washington has been the guy who single-handedly carried Dallas in the series offensively. He's been the guy in the series who's been the game changer, and he's been the reason why Dallas has won the two games that they've won. It's been behind the efforts of PJ Washington. He's been shockingly that great on the offensive side of the ball. Okay, maybe it's not shocking because he hasn't been noticed in Charlotte. No offense to the Hornets, but still, it's been the efforts of PJ Washington in this round and Kyrie Irving in the last one. When is Luka Doncic's turn? When is it Luka's turn to take control of his team, show the superstar he is? Because when you get further, it's going to be harder to win games when your superstar is not performing up to par, and you can't rely on other guys to have offensive games because at the end of the day, you're supposed to. We know you're the guy who's supposed to score. We know you're the guy who's supposed to be the person to single-handedly carry this team. And even though PJ Washington has had great offensive games, he is not the guy who is going to ultimately elevate this team to where your and the rest of the Maverick fan base and team's expectations are, which is a title. And could they win a title if Doncic, Irving, and Washington play great this year? Absolutely. They have an opportunity to make the conference finals. Of course, they have an opportunity to make the finals and win a title. That we're in that situation. We're that deep into the playoffs now. But Luka's got to perform better. I'm sorry, he just has to perform better. And there's not, and there, and there's other blame. There's other blame. Like Kyrie hasn't played great. Tim Hardaway, someone who we've seen rely heavily upon at times on the offensive end for Dallas, has not played great. Yes, there's other blame, but at the end of the day, it all falls onto you because you are the superstar of this team. So Luka's got to play better. Also, Dallas's free throw shooting, something that has been a concern for the most of this playoffs, and it's especially a concern in this game when Dallas had opportunities at the free throw line, even with the Thunder coming back to tie this game, win this game, and they couldn't do it. They shot 12 of 23 from the free throw line, 52.2%. I can shoot better than that from the free throw line. No offense. I mean, I can go out there and shoot that. I know it's tough to shoot at home. There's pressure in the playoffs. There's pressure, of course. But at the end of the day, 52% is unacceptable. I don't care what team that is. I don't care if that's a college team or a high school team. You cannot be shooting 52% from the free throw line. That at the end of the day, that's why you lost. You missed 11 free throws. 11 free throws, you lost by 4. You hit 5 more, you win. That plain and simple right there. You didn't even have to have that great of a free throw performance, and you missed free throws. The free throw performance has to be better because remember, these free throws are free points. That's why they're there. They are free points. You earned the free throws. You drew the fouls. They're free points for you to take. And Dallas did not take advantage of that. And here we are sitting here with now a tied series when ultimately Dallas should have won that game, whether that was with the efforts of Luka being better or whether it was on the free throw line. So this is very disappointing for Dallas. They should be up 3-1 easily, 100%. And now the Thunder are back in the series. You gave them rejuvenated hope, and now they have the advantage with home court advantage. And Dallas is now going to have to steal one. Once again, that's how it is. And they did not take advantage of the situation, and it could cost them ultimately at the end of the day. But let's go on to our last series, our least interesting series, I would say, of the second round. This one's 3-1. Celtics are probably going to close it out in game 5 that we know. And I'm not really going to talk about the series overall. I know the Celtics had a little bit of a scare in Cleveland, but it's expected. You can't win every game by 30 points. Like, you got to give the Celtics a little bit of leeway there. Even though Donovan Mitchell wasn't playing, we expected them to blow them out. A little bit of a concern, but still, they won the game. Darius Garland played great for Cleveland. Evan Mobley, once again, performing well. And it was a little bit scary, but at the end of the day, Boston won the game. Boston won, and they rightfully and respectively won, and now they have the opportunity to close out at home. But we're going to talk about something different, something that I ponder while looking at this Eastern Conference, the state of the Eastern Conference. You've got, let's just go down the seed lines. You've got the 2 seed New York, crippled. We know the story. Randall, Anunoby, Brunson, Bogdanovich, Mitchell Robinson. The list goes on and on. 3 seed Bucks, Giannis out, Damian Lillard out. 4 seed Cavaliers. Now you got Mitchell out. Jared Allen's been out. 5 seed Magic. Okay, Magic. Okay. That Pacers and Magic, young teams. 5 and 6 seed Pacers, Magic. 7 seed Philadelphia 76ers. Embiid's not healthy. We saw it. 8 seed the Miami Heat, who you played in the first round. Butler, Terry Rozier, not healthy. You see a little bit of a correlation there. You still got to give credit where credit is due for Boston. They took care of business. It's hard to win the playoffs no matter who you're playing, but they have not been battle tested. And I'm looking at the Bucks in 2021 when they had to play some of those teams who were injured. What seed were they? They were the 3 seed. They played the Heat. The Heat that year were just dismantled from the finals in the bubble. Then they played the Nets. Harden, Kyrie out. Then the Hawks. Trae Young was out for a little bit. That was an easy path to the finals. But this path, in my opinion, with Boston, this 2023 Celtics team has an easier path to me than the Milwaukee Bucks did 2021. You look at the state of the Eastern Conference. You look at Milwaukee, if they've been battle tested or not. I mean, Boston, if they've been battle tested or not. They have not. You look at Milwaukee in 2021, they were battle tested. They had to face adversity in a 7-game series against Brooklyn. Of course, they probably should have lost that series if Durant had a smaller foot size, but they still won. They won the title at the end of the day. They were battle tested in that game 7, going to overtime, facing adversity. Boston has been in quick, easy series, nothing to worry about. Everybody's injured. Hooray. That's a problem. That is a problem. They have not been battle tested. They need to be battle tested before the finals. And I don't know if the Knicks can provide that. I don't know if the Pacers could provide that. I don't really think so. I think Boston could easily finish them as well if they play up to par. Now, if they have some stupid games, of course, this could end up lingering to a 6 and 7 game series. But do I think they're going to be battle tested? No, I think this East is relatively weak. And I think that could cause them problems going into the finals when you're playing a Denver team who has been the most battle tested out of any team in the playoffs. You're down 0-2. You lost your first 2 games at home. You must win the 2 games on the road in Minnesota. And they did that. They have been battle tested and they have executed it. You look at a team like maybe OKC, they've been battle tested. I just talked about it. Down 10 on the road, on the verge of going down 3-1. Came back. Even Dallas has been battle tested before. You got so and Minnesota has been battle tested as well in this playoffs as well. And they're going to be battle tested again when they're going to have to win this game 6 and not lose 4 straight. Every team in the West, considering how difficult that conference has been this year in this postseason, has been battle tested. In the East, maybe with the exception of that Knicks and Pacers series, Knicks and Pacers have not. And the efforts of being battle tested, not the efforts, but the terms of being battle tested is something that is important. It's important to be battle tested going into the finals. You can't just walk into the finals and say, hey, here we go. Let's go. We got this in the bag. No, it takes adversity. It takes fight to win in the finals because it's not necessarily all about in the finals who's more talented, who has the more talented roster. Because we've seen all the time teams on paper who are just more talented in the finals just lose. They lose for some strange reason. And some of that reason is because they have not been battle tested. They have not faced adversity in the postseason. And this Boston team is just cakewalking. They're going to have to face adversity at some point. I don't think that's going to be in the conference finals. I think it's going to be in the finals only. And that is a problem. And they could let a couple of games slip. They could let 2 games slip. And here you go. It's tough to come back from 0-2. It's tough because you look at it in 2023, 2022 when Boston did make the finals. They were battle tested. They had to win a game 7 on the road in Miami, and a close one. They almost blew what was a 9-point lead with a minute to go. That almost happened. They faced adversity and they held on in that series. And quite frankly, I think that Boston team should have won the finals. And I think that 2022 Celtics team is better than this Celtics team. But ultimately, you've got you've got Steph Curry on the other side in 2022, which is why they lost. But going back to this Celtics team, you haven't had that same adversity as your teams in the past. You haven't had adversity as other teams in the league. And that could cause problems because I've seen teams like the 2011 Miami Heat cruised all the way to the finals. Now you face adversity against this Dallas Mavericks team. Whoops, you lost. And clearly, we know Miami way more talented than Dallas at that point. And Dallas have faced adversity, and you got to give credit where credit is due there. This is a problem for Boston. And when they face adversity, when they're down in a series, because I don't think they're going to be down in a series until the finals, what are you going to do to respond? Because we haven't seen that from the Celtics team all season. It's been cakewalk, cruise past the season, easy through the playoffs, injuries, yada, yada, yada. What are we going to see from this Boston team? Because we're not going to be able to answer, is this Boston team ready to win a finals until the actual finals? We're not going to know. And that's what's going to be interesting. We're not going to know. I'm not necessarily saying it's going to be their demise, but that is something to look out for going into the finals because it's tough. Teams may not be prepared to face tougher teams unless they are battle tested by other teams. Like when you look at let's say, I'm trying to think. I'm not trying to think of the Heat because I'm always talking about the Heat, but I just bring up the Heat from last year in 2023. Could they have beaten that Boston Celtics team last year if they didn't have the adversity of facing Milwaukee, didn't have the adversity of facing a gritty and grind team like the Knicks? No, they wouldn't have been ready to face that Celtics team. They wouldn't have been ready to be battle tested against that team, and they won. You need time in order to be ready, be mentally prepared. And they haven't really shown that they are mentally prepared without facing adversity because we've seen them play against Denver. We've seen them play against Minnesota, OKC. They've lost. They've lost a lot of those games. They have had a terrible record against the West's best teams. So what are we going to see from Boston? We don't know until the finals, and that's what's going to be interesting going down the stretch of this postseason. And that's all the time I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching the Take Your Shot podcast. And remember to please follow me on Instagram at take underscore your underscore shot underscore podcast underscore. That's at take underscore your underscore shot underscore podcast underscore. And tell me how you would have taken your shots on these takes. That's all my shots for the day. See you Friday. We've got some game 5 recaps, one game 6 recap. We've got it all. Previewing potential game 7s because we may have a few of them. This weekend is going to be great. These couple of games before Friday, these Wednesday, Thursday games are going to be great. We'll see what happens. And don't you worry, I will take my shot on those when the time approaches. But for now, that is it. I will see you next time. Remember to please leave a like and subscribe. It means a lot to me, especially as we're trying to grow this podcast and do big things in the future. Please do that for me, and we will see you Friday.